was 26th October when Barcelona lost against their biggest rivals. It wasn't just the result, it was the fact that Madrid could score 4, maybe even 5 goals that day. Blaugrana was completely helpless. It seemed like Madrid is gonna win the league. However, after that match we started seeing completely different Barcelona. They managed to win 8 out of 8 La Liga games after that. Currently, they are sitting at the top of La Liga with 4 points advantage and having better goal per game ratio than last season. Today we will discuss about Barcelona's tactics. We are starting off with the build-up phase. Number of Barca's pivots in the build-up varies from 1 to 2, but in the most cases they operate with a double pivot. Centre-backs would split up and create 3v2 advantage against opposition's attack. Also, we have to mention that 4-2-3-1 naturally has a numerical advantage in the midfield against 4-4-2, which is most used formation without the ball. And Barcelona always try to exploit it. When they play with Olmo, he often pushes between the lines. Opponents usually don't want to counter this with pushing one of their centre-backs higher because they know how vertical Flick's team is and how potentially dangerous it can be. So instead, opponents choose to mark Olmo with dropping one of their central midfielders. And if they play with forwards higher on the pitch, Pedri and Garcia can receive the ball. We have to mention the way Barcelona looks to grow distances between opponents' lines. They tend to build up with 7 players in their turn, which naturally forces the opponent to press higher. Attackers position themselves higher, and since there is no offside from the goal kick, backline is now forced to follow them. This creates a massive space for attacking midfielder to exploit. Opposition's attackers usually tend to stay closer to Pedri and Garcia because of potential overload. When Garcia receives the ball, pivots usually push higher to drag the attackers with them to create a space for the centre-backs to progress with the ball. If, for some reason, one of the attackers decides to press Garcia, he could possibly leave the central midfielder overloaded. As backline and midfielders are progressing, attackers usually stay on the 50 to 60 meters from their goal. This creates a situation where their opponent have a high line without applying pressure. This breaks the first rule of high press. You should never ever have a high line without applying pressure on the centre-backs. And when you break that rule, it means that there is a time and space for long balls to be played behind the back line, and we saw how lethal Barcelona can be in these scenarios. If they press, they will be overloaded in the center. If they choose not to press, there will be a potential long through ball. So, opponent will be forced to track Pedri and Garcia, but that will again create the space for Garcia. And there is one more thing. When Barcelona operates with a double pivot, we rarely can see that they are in the same line. Flick's team always try to stagger the lines, which gives more passing angles for the player with the ball. If the opponent chooses to press with 5 players, like Villarreal did, then Blaugrana play with a single pivot. It is simply because they still have the numerical advantage in their third of the pitch, and Flick always wants to have as much players as possible higher on the pitch. If they operate with two defensive midfielders, there will be only one player between the lines, and he could be marked by Villarreal's defensive midfielder. Because of that, Garcia played as a defensive midfielder while Pedri and De Jong tried to get the ball between the lines. When Garcia played to the centre-back, Villarreal's press would begin. Closer attacker would apply pressure on the centre-back while central midfielder marked Eric Garcia. Wide midfielder was more than ready to press Balde while far attacker was blocking a possible pass into the center. Fermin could be marked as well. Defensive midfielder marked De Jong, but he wasn't adventurous enough to follow the Dutch all over the pitch. When Martin received, it was a signal for De Jong to move to the left and to be ready to overload right midfielder with Balde. Villarreal's wide midfielder was more concentrated on applying pressure on Balde, so De Jong will be free to receive. He had a lot of space to progress the ball in these situations. No matter if Flick's side operate with one or two defensive midfielders, they will exploit and outplay the opposition. So far we talked about Barcelona's build-up tactics. Now we will move on and analyze their tactics in possession phase. When Barca have the ball a little bit higher on the pitch, Balde often pushes forward, which creates a lopsided back three. Pedri and Eric Garcia are most used midfielders. Pedri is the one who dictates the tempo. He is able to find his teammates with short passes, long passes and through balls. He is like a combination of deep-lying playmaker, controller and even progressive midfielder. He can easily play the role crosshead in Madrid in 2024. When Balde pushes a little bit higher, sometimes Pedri positions himself between Balde and Martin. If right back chooses to press him, he will be overloaded. But the opposition is aware of that, so they look to press Pedri with right midfielder. That creates even a bigger space in the midfield because of Olmo's positioning. There are various rotations and traps on the other side of the pitch. When Cubarsí has the ball, Yamal sometimes drops deeper. Left backs are almost always looking to apply the immediate pressure on Yamal because of his elite dribbling. Even the zonal-oriented teams tend to man-mark Yamal. And Barca looks to exploit that aggressive man-on-man marking against Yamal. Whenever he drops deeper, there is space between centre-back and left-back. So Koundé looks to exploit it by doing opposing movement, which literally forces miscommunication. So when Flick's side is looking to harm the opponent by doing opposing movement between Koundé and Yamal, Olmo also drops deeper to drag central midfielder, which creates even more space to Koundé. Koundé can also push higher like Balde. Last season, Barcelona almost always operated with one more offensive fullback, which was Balde, while Koundé most of the time played as more conservative fullback, with occasional underlapping runs. That underlapping runs were made primarily to open space for Yamal, but having Garcia as defensive midfielders gives Barcelona a lot of options. When the team is higher on the pitch, Eric Garcia can drop in the backline to play as centre-back alongside Martin and Cubarsí, which allows Koundé to push higher. And this can create a triangle and overload on the right flank. Now this can force the wide midfielder to come even wider to counter this overload. If he chooses instead to play centrally, there can be a 3v2 overload down the right flank. However, if he decides to push wider, there will be a massive space in the midfield. Koundé can also choose the option to drop deeper, and that is a sign for Olmo to do the opposing movement, which will drag the central midfielder even closer to backline. Left midfielder is now forced to follow Koundé, but that will open the space for Garcia to exploit. And again, when Barcelona player receives the ball, there are multiple players attacking the backline. We just have to mention Raphinha. He is constantly making vertical runs for different reasons. One is, of course, running in behind and trying to get the long ball behind the backline. Other reason is forcing the opposition to drop deeper, which creates a space between the lines. Raphinha can play the Dani Olmo role as well. In the match against Osasuna, Barca played with Rashford, Yamal and Raphinha. Brazilian was all over the pitch. He often positioned himself in the right half space between the lines. Since Osasuna was defending in a 5-4-1 formation, left centre-back often hesitated to follow him. Brazilian was aware of that and sometimes he dropped even deeper, close to Garcia. It was a sign for Yamal to do the opposing movement and that could cause a miscommunication. In that match, Raphinha regularly played as a central midfielder to create a 3v2 advantage in the midfield. Of course, there is a lot of things I didn't say, but it's just not possible to cover all the tactics in one video. If you have something to add, drop it down below. And if you like this video and if you are a fan of football tactics, please like and subscribe.